Message collapsed. Read two memories. Read two memories. Shani Yahan Hai Terra full 3-part story, har part of now lag document style main, 7,000 8,000 words each, total plus words. Title: Your Horrors, the Humans' Words That Broke an Alien Veteran. Part 1. Your Hours, the Humans' Words That Broke an Alien Veteran. A story in 3 parts. Part I, The Weight of Stars. There's a moment, and if you've ever stood on the edge of something too large to name, you know the one I mean, where the universe stops pretending it cares about you. No ceremony, no warning. Just the cold and the dark, and the sudden understanding that you are very, very small. I was 26 years old when I had that moment for the first time. I was standing in the middle of Helix Station's lower concourse, Gate 7, surrounded by 6,000 beings from 31 different species, and I was the only human in the room holding a sign that said "Welcome Home, Sergeant Vale." And nobody, not one living creature in that entire concourse, thought that was anything other than hilarious. Let me back up. The year is 2347. Earth has been part of the Galactic Cooperative for 41 years, which sounds like a long time until you understand that the cooperative itself is 11,000 years old, and our 41 years of membership is, by their reckoning, the political equivalent of a toddler wandering onto a Senate floor and confidently sitting in the wrong chair. We are tolerated. We are studied. We are, depending on which species you ask, either the most fascinating anomaly the cooperative has ever produced, or the single most embarrassing diplomatic incident in its entire recorded history. Sometimes both, often both. The Helix Station system was humanity's first real foothold in deep cooperative space, a transfer hub situated at the junction of 4 major galactic trade corridors, which meant it was always full, always loud, always smelling of something you couldn't identify and probably didn't want to. The atmosphere was kept breathable for the majority of registered species, which in practice meant it was too thin for human comfort, too ammonia-adjacent for anyone's enjoyment, and just warm enough that the Vrethkai delegates never had to wear their external heat suits, which they found deeply undignified, and which humans found deeply terrifying because an unarmored Vrethkai looked like someone had taught a cathedral to be annoyed. I worked there. Officially, I was a cooperative liaison specialist, a title that sounded important and meant, in practice, that I handled the administrative processing of incoming and outgoing personnel from Earth's assigned fleet units, paperwork, scheduling, sometimes translation support when the automated systems flagged something too nuanced for algorithmic interpretation. In reality, I spent most of my time being the human in the room, the representative specimen, the one being stared at when they thought I wasn't looking with that expression, and it translates across species, I promise you, it genuinely translates, the one that means, smaller than I expected. I was used to it. I was used to a lot of things by then. The sign had been my mother's idea. She'd video called me 3 weeks before the scheduled arrival of CFS Unbroken Meridian, which was carrying, among its 300 crew members and 14 tons of medical supply transfers, 1 specialist first class Elena Vale, formerly of Earth's Cooperative Fleet Division, now technically on compassionate discharge pending medical review. My mother had cried for 20 minutes on the call. Then she'd straightened up, blown her nose very loudly into something off-screen and said, "Rafe, you make her a sign. You be the first face she sees when she comes off that ship. You hear me?" I heard her. So I made the sign. Recycled smart paper, blue ink because Elena's favorite color was always blue, letters sized large enough to be visible from across a crowded concourse. I'd laminated it, which in retrospect was excessive, but I was anxious, and when I'm anxious I laminate things. It's a coping mechanism. I stand by it. I'd been waiting at gate 7 for 2 hours when the laughter started. It wasn't mean, exactly. Or it was, but not the way human cruelty usually works, the kind with intention and target selection. This was more the laughter of the genuinely baffled, the sound that erupts when something is so outside a being's frame of reference that their social processing just skips. A pair of Dravathi traders, long, iridescent, moving like oil poured sideways, glided past me and made the low harmonic sound that their species used for amusement. Their translator beads rendered it as ceremonial greeting token detected. Function unclear. A Vrethkai security officer stopped walking, looked at my sign, looked at me, made no sound whatsoever, which, if you know anything about Vrethkai, is somehow worse. Their silence has weight, their silence has opinions. A cluster of Sci-fi diplomats, small, precise, the kind of beings who gave you the impression they had already calculated every possible outcome of this conversation, and found them all wanting, paused in their procession to photograph my sign with their ocular recording membranes. I stood there, held my sign, smiled the smile of a man who has decided that dignity is overrated and love is not. The unbroken meridian docked at 1400 station time. Personnel egress began 11 minutes later. I watched the umbilical corridor fill and empty, and fill again. Cooperative soldiers, cooperative support staff, cooperative medical personnel moving through with the practiced efficiency of people who had been doing this long enough that transition between environments was just another Tuesday. I was watching so carefully for Alina that I almost missed the other thing. Almost. The being that came through the corridor at 1423 station time was Vrethkai. This I registered first, the sheer scale of it, the way its presence rearranged the air pressure around it. Vrethkai are not the largest species in the cooperative. They are not the most dangerous, not on paper. But there is something about the way they carry themselves, a quality of compressed certainty, of having decided long ago that the universe would accommodate them, and having been proven correct so many times that the assumption had calcified into architecture. That makes every room they enter slightly smaller. This one was old. I could tell by the pigmentation of its carapace, the secondary plates along its shoulder ridges shifting from the deep gunmetal of its youth into something closer to tarnished silver. It walked without the measured authority of a serving officer. It walked the way a building moves in an earthquake, not choosing to exactly, but doing it anyway, because that's simply what it is. Its designation markings. The Vrethkai use a combination of bioluminescent patterning and carved insignia for rank identification, were military, old military, the kind that predated the current cooperative fleet reorganization, which meant this being had been fighting wars before Earth knew other planets existed. It was also, I noticed, walking slightly wrong. Not injured, not visibly, but there was a hesitation in its gait, a micro-pause before each left foreleg stride, that looked like the kind of thing a being develops when it has spent a very long time compensating for something it refuses to acknowledge. I filed this away. I don't know why. Force of habit, maybe. Alina always said I noticed things about people that I had no business noticing. People she'd specified once grinning at me, not beings. You treat everyone like people, Rafe, it's disgusting, it's one of your worst qualities. She'd said it like a compliment. She came through at 1431. I saw the dark braid first, still regulation length, still slightly unruly at the edges where the short hairs refused discipline, and then the familiar slope of her shoulders, and then her face, and she looked. She looked like someone who had been through something and come out the other side, and was still working out whether the other side was better. Tired, not broken, never broken, but tired in the way that sleep doesn't fix. I lifted my sign. She saw it from 40 feet away. Her face did something complicated, the way faces do when too many feelings arrive at the same time, and none of them know which one gets to be in charge. Her mouth pressed flat. Her eyes went bright. She stopped walking for exactly 1 second, which caused the Sci-fi officer behind her to walk directly into her back and make an extremely offended sound. She said very clearly across 40 feet of crowded concourse, "Rafe, you absolute idiot." "Welcome home, Sergeant Vale," I said. She crossed the distance in 12 seconds. I know because I counted. And then she was there, and her arms were around me, and she was shaking just slightly. The way people shake when they've been holding something for too long and have finally found a place to put it down, and I held on, and I kept holding on. The Dravathi traders harmonized. I didn't care. We were standing there, Alina's forehead pressed against my shoulder, my chin against her hair, her regulation duffel having apparently taken the opportunity to fall off her shoulder and redistribute its contents across approximately 4 square feet of station floor, when the Vrethkai came back. I don't know what it had been doing in the intervening minutes, going through its own processing maybe. Dealing with whatever logistics a being of that age and rank has to deal with when transitioning off a military transport. I hadn't been tracking it. But it had apparently been tracking us. It stopped approximately 2 meters away. 2 meters for a Vrethkai is extremely close. Their cultural protocols around proximity are elaborate, and I only know the basics, but I know enough to understand that 2 meters means intentional, deliberate, not accidental. I looked up. It was looking at Alina. Alina didn't notice immediately. She was still doing the thing, the breathing thing, the steady and slow and "I'm okay, I'm really okay" thing, and I didn't want to disrupt it. But the Vrethkai's proximity was generating a kind of gravitational attention from the beings around us. The Sci-fi officers had stopped. 2 cooperative fleet soldiers, Grethani, I think, hard to tell with the visors, had halted mid-stride. Something was happening. I didn't know what yet. Alina straightened up, registered the stillness around her. Her soldier's instincts hit before her conscious mind did. I watched her spine shift, her weight redistribute, her hand moving automatically toward a sidearm she wasn't carrying because she was on compassionate discharge. She looked at the Vrethkai. The Vrethkai looked at her. Its bioluminescent markings, which in standard conditions produced a low, steady pulse indicating neutral status, had shifted. The pattern was one I'd seen documented but never witnessed in person. Vrethkai designation scholars called it Ikrath Val. It had approximately 11 different translations depending on context, school of interpretation, and regional dialect. The closest human rendering, as best as anyone had managed, was something like, "I am standing before a question I have carried for a long time." The Vrethkai said, in cooperative standard, its voice like tectonic plates having a disagreement. "You were on the meridian." It wasn't a question. Alina said, "Yes." "Sector 9, the Palavar engagement." Alina went very still. I didn't know what the Palavar engagement was. I would look it up later, at 2 a.m. in my quarters, and I would spend the following 3 hours sitting on the floor. But in that moment, I just watched Alina's face do the thing, the controlled devastation thing, the thing where all the muscles tighten slightly, evenly, like a system bracing for impact. "Yes," she said again. The Vrethkai's markings shifted, cycled, settled into something I had no reference for. "I commanded the 3rd Harrow Division," it said. "We were positioned 12 light minutes from your vessel's last recorded coordinates." "I know," Alina said. "We received the distress signal." "I know." We did not respond. The concourse hadn't gone quiet. Concourses don't, really, they're too large, too full. The machinery of 6,000 beings, logistics too relentless to halt for any single conversation. But the immediate pocket of space around us had developed that particular quality of charged silence that happens when the beings near you stop pretending they aren't listening. Elena said nothing. The Vrethkai said, the strategic calculus at the time. I know the calculus, Elena said. Her voice was flat, controlled, the voice of someone who has rehearsed this conversation in their head enough times that the actual version is almost a formality. 93 ships versus 4, our 4. The Palavar formation was still inside the corridor threshold. If your division had broken position to respond, you'd have lost the corridor, and the Palavar would have had deep system access for the next 8 months. The Vrethkai said, yes. The math was correct, Elena said. Yes. 31 people died on my ship, Elena said. The math was still correct. Something moved in the Vrethkai's secondary optics, the smaller set, the ones that didn't track threat vectors but registered something closer to what humans would call expression. I'd read about this. I'd never seen it directed at a human before. I have carried this, the Vrethkai said, for 3 years and 7 months, by cooperative standard reckoning. Yeah, Elena said, me too. This is where it should have ended, probably. 2 veterans, impossible situation, math that was correct and human beings who died anyway. The kind of thing that doesn't resolve, doesn't heal, just becomes load-bearing, becomes the thing you build your continued functioning around, the weight that keeps you anchored. This is where it should have ended. But I was holding a laminated sign that said "Welcome Home, Sergeant Vale," and I had been standing in this concourse for 2 hours, and I had been the subject of 7 distinct forms of alien condescension, and I had watched my best friend's face do the controlled devastation thing, and something in me, the part that my mother had made probably, the stubborn, love-stupid, occasionally disastrous part, decided that endings were someone else's department. I stepped forward. Not between them, just adjacent. Close enough that both of them had to register me as a presence in the exchange. The Vrethkai's primary optics shifted to me. I was, by any measure it had ever used, negligible, 26 years old, 178 centimeters of human with a laminated sign and an anxiety response that expressed itself through over-preparation. No rank, no tactical relevance, no history in this conversation. I looked up at it. It had a solid 40 centimeters on me, maybe more, and I said, "She survived." The Vrethkai said nothing. 31 people didn't, I said, but she did, and she's standing here and she came home. I paused. I just thought someone should say that. The Vrethkai's markings cycled again. I didn't know what they meant. I still don't precisely. The Vrethkai cultural attaché I spoke to about it later said the pattern I was describing was recorded in maybe a dozen historical accounts, and the translation attempts ranged from recalibration to the moment. A calculation updates its own premise. I know what it looked like from where I was standing. It looked like a wall, deciding it could afford to be a door. The Vrethkai looked at Elena for a long moment. Then it said, in a register so low the floor vibrated slightly, "I am Getharak Sorn. I commanded 14 engagements over 47 years of service. I have made the correct decision and the wrong choice simultaneously many times." Elena said, "Sorn," not a question, just acknowledgement, like she was pinning the name somewhere she could keep it. "I will remember the 31, Sorn said. "I have always remembered them. I will now also remember you." Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Rafe, what does your sign say?" I held it up. She looked at it for a long moment. "Welcome home, Sergeant Vale," she read. "Welcome home," I said. She made a sound that was half laugh and half something else, the ratio unclear. She bent and picked up her duffel. She straightened up and looked at Sorn, and there was something different in her face now, still tired, still the weight that sleep didn't fix, but something alongside it, something that hadn't been there before. "Take care of yourself, Commander," she said. Soren inclined its massive head. It was, I would later learn from 3 different cultural reference sources, the Vrethkai equivalent of, and also you. We left the concourse. Alina carried her duffel, I carried my sign. We walked through the transit corridor toward the civilian quarters section, past the Dravathi trading stalls and the Sothi bureaucratic offices, and the small, fluorescent-lit food concession that served something the menu described as nutrient-optimized caloric provision, and that tasted, as Alina put it when she bit into one 15 minutes later, like someone described bread to a being who has never seen bread, and that being then designed bread from first principles. And the result was technically bread-shaped. She ate 3 of them. I ate 2. We sat in the food concession, Alina and I, at a small table near the viewport that looked out into the slow-spinning dark, and she told me about the Palavar engagement in the way she told stories. The same way she'd always told stories, since we were 11 years old, which is to say sideways. Starting with a detail that shouldn't matter and letting the important things assemble themselves around it while she wasn't looking directly at them. The detail she started with this time was that one of the crew members who died, a weapons tech named Priya Samanthan, who was 24 from Kochi, had, the morning of the engagement, been teaching Alina to play a card game from her home region. They'd gotten through the first 2 rounds. Priya had been winning. She was so pleased about it, Alina said. She kept laughing at me. She had this laugh, the kind where her whole face went into it. She looked out the viewport. I never learned the rest of the game. I didn't say anything. The math was correct, Alina said. Soren's math was correct. Maiko's math was correct. Everyone's math was correct. She looked at her hands. There's no one to be angry at. Is that worse? I asked. Yeah, she said. Yeah, it really is. We were quiet. Outside the viewport, a supply shuttle crossed the dark, a small lit thing against an enormous backdrop, going somewhere specific for reasons that made sense to it. Rafe, Alina said. Yeah. The sign was really embarrassing. I know. The lamination was absolutely unnecessary. Arguably. She looked at me. Thank you, she said. I thought later, much later, after Alina was asleep in the guest bunk, and I was sitting in the main room in the dark with a cup of something that approximated tea, about what I'd said to Soren. She survived. 2 words, nothing tactical, nothing strategic, no rank, no weight, no authority behind them. Just the fact of it, the plain and stubborn fact. She was standing here. She was alive. The math had taken 31 and the math had somehow also left her, and I had thought someone should say that out loud. I had thought the universe owed her at least that much. Someone saying out loud that it had not quite managed to take everything. I didn't know, sitting there in the dark with my approximate tea, that Soren was 3 levels up, in the Vrethkai transit quarters, standing in front of the narrow viewport in its assigned space, doing something that Vrethkai do only rarely and only in private. I didn't know it was standing there thinking about 2 words spoken by a human, with a laminated sign. I didn't know any of the things that were going to happen next. I just sat there, in the dark, drinking my tea, being the small and stubborn creature I had always been. And outside the station, the stars kept their old, cold silence, the way they always have. The way they always will. Every orientation packet, every diplomatic briefing, every piece of public-facing cooperative literature describes Helix Station in terms of its dimensions, its traffic capacity, its role as a nexus point for 11 major trade agreements and 43 ongoing diplomatic accords. Nobody mentions that it smells like a wet circuit board that once got into a fight with a chemistry lab. Alina noticed it the morning after she arrived, which was the morning after I had not slept, which was the morning she walked into the main room of my quarters looking like she'd maybe slept 4 hours, and considered that acceptable and found me still in the chair with a second cup of approximate tea, and an expression she described as, "that specific face you make when you've been thinking too loud for too long." She wasn't wrong. "You're doing the thing," she said. "I'm not doing anything. You're doing the thing where you sit somewhere and think at it until it surrenders." I was just, Rafe. I was thinking about Sorn. She went to the food unit, requested something with calories, waited for it. Took it to the other chair by the viewport. The station's slow rotation had brought a different sector of star field into view, the dense cluster toward the galactic arm that looked like someone had spilled light, and sat down. "Yeah," she said, "me too." We'd submitted the arrival paperwork the night before, which meant Alina had 48 hours before her mandatory medical review, and I had a shift starting at 900 that I was going to be functional for if I had to will it through sheer bureaucratic obligation. The Cooperative Liaison Office did not care about your personal feelings. It cared about throughput. I showered, changed, ate something. Checked the morning transit manifest, which was what I did every morning, partly professional habit, partly the deeply human impulse to know who was arriving and departing, to have some sense of the station's tidal movement. Most of it was routine: cargo transfers, personnel rotations, a Dravathi cultural delegation that had been listed as arriving for 6 consecutive days and appeared to still be doing whatever Dravathi delegations did before they actually went somewhere. One entry made me stop. GETH ARAKSWRN Commander Rhett. Transit designation, long-term residency transfer. Assigned Sector 7, Level 12, Quarters Block Vrethkai Standard. Long-term residency. Not transit, not brief stopover, long-term. I looked at this for a while. Then I went to work. The Cooperative Liaison Office was not a beautiful space. It was a practical space, rows of processing terminals, a curved desk staffed by a rotating cast of beings who had all, in their various physiological ways, developed the expression of people who were very committed to being fair and very tired of explaining why fairness was complicated. My supervisor was a Soth I named Vetholen, who had been managing the Human Liaison Division for 9 years and who had, over those 9 years, developed a relationship with humanity that could best be described as reluctant affection. She found us exasperating. She found us fascinating. She was not entirely certain these were different things. She was waiting when I got in. "You know the Vrethkai," she said, not a question. Vetholen operated primarily in statements. "Commander Sorn, we met yesterday at the gate." She looked at me for a moment with the specific Sothai expression that I thought of as computing consequences. "He submitted a request this morning," she said, "through the diplomatic liaison desk, not military, civilian. The request is unusual." "Unusual how?" "He is requesting assignment to the Human Transit Processing Support Division," she said, "under civilian volunteer protocol, advisory capacity." I waited. "There is no precedent," she said, "for a Vrethkai combat veteran, retired at commander level, to request assignment to a human administrative division." "No," I said, "I imagine not. The Vrethkai Cultural Attaché's office has already contacted me," she said. "They are concerned this represents a health indicator. Post-service adjustment difficulties are not uncommon in combat veterans of extended careers." "Is that what you think?" I asked. Vetholen looked at me for a long time with those precise, dark Sothai eyes. "I think," she said carefully, "that you said something to him yesterday that I was not present to hear, and that whatever it was, it had an effect." I thought about 2 words. "She survived." "I just said the obvious thing," I said. "That," said Vetholen, who had worked with humans for 9 years, "is frequently your species' most dangerous capability." I went to find Alina. She was predictably not where I'd left her. I found her 40 minutes later in the lower concourse observation deck, an area not technically open to non-ticketed civilians, but where the security system had a documented gap that I suspected at least 2/3 of station residents knew about, sitting on the floor with her back against the transparent barrier, looking at the docking assembly below. She'd gotten a coffee from somewhere, real coffee, not the approximate kind. She held it in both hands. I sat next to her. He requested a placement, I said. Sorn, Human Administrative Division, Advisory Capacity. Elena turned her head to look at me. He requested to work with humans, I said. Why? I don't know exactly. Vetholen thinks he's adjusting, post-service. Elena looked back at the docking assembly. A Vrethkai freight vessel was moving into berth, slow and enormous, the way Vrethkai engineering always was, designed for permanence over elegance, built to endure rather than impress. 47 years, she said. That's what he said, 47 years of service. Yeah. And then you retire, and then what? She looked at her coffee. You just stop. You stop being the thing you were for 47 years and you start being something else. I think that's the part he's working on, I said. Elena was quiet. He remembered the ship, she said. He named the engagement, he'd been carrying it. She paused. 3 years and 7 months, he said that. He knew the exact count. Yeah, she turned the coffee cup in her hands. That's a thing soldiers do, we count things. We count the days, we count the losses, we count the engagements and the coordinates and the names. Her jaw set slightly. I could tell you the name of every person on the Meridian, all 316 of them. I could tell you Priya Samanthan's card game score when she died. She didn't say it like a display. She said it the way you state a fact about gravity, simply, because it's true, because it doesn't require decoration. He came back to the concourse, she said. After everything cleared, he came back and he stood there and he said those things. Yeah. He didn't have to do that. No. She looked at me. He came back because of you, she said, because you stepped in and said the thing. I just said. I know what you said, Rafe. Her voice was not unkind. It was precise. You said the thing that was true and simple, and that nobody had thought was worth saying because it wasn't strategic. It wasn't tactical. It didn't change the math. No, I said. It changed something else, she said, didn't it? I went to Sorn's quarters. This was, arguably, a significant overreach for a cooperative liaison specialist with no standing in Vrethkai diplomatic protocol. I was aware of this. I was also the person who laminated signs and sat in chairs thinking too loud, so my relationship with appropriate overreach was already complicated. The Vrethkai quarters on level 12 were built to standard Vrethkai environmental spec, slightly dimmer than human comfortable, atmosphere pressure elevated, temperature running cooler. I'd requested clearance through the diplomatic channel, which meant Vetholen had to sign off, which meant I'd had to explain to her what I was doing, which had produced a long silence, and then, I will note in the file that I cautioned you against this, and you proceeded anyway. This is consistent with prior records. It was. The door opened. Getharak Sorn occupied its quarters the way it had occupied the concourse, completely. Not aggressively, just fully. Like a presence that had never learned to make itself smaller and saw no reason to start. Its secondary plates had shifted overnight, the silver tones more pronounced in the quarter's dimmer light. The bioluminescent patterning was running low, subdued. It looked, and I could be wrong about this, I'm always trying to map alien physiology onto human reference points. It looked like a being that hadn't slept well. I stood in the doorway. My name is Rafe Calloway, I said. I was at the gate yesterday. I'm Elena Vales. I paused, sorting through words. She and I have known each other since we were 11. She is the person closest to me in the universe. Sorn looked at me. I know who you are, it said. You requested a placement with the human division. Yes. Why? Soren was quiet for a moment. The bioluminescent markings pulsed once, a slow, single cycle I didn't have the reference to read. I commanded, it said, for 47 years. In that time I made 412 distinct tactical decisions. I have reviewed each of them. Many of them required choosing between the death of few and the survival of many. The math, a pause, as Sergeant Vale said. The math was frequently correct. And I am now in possession of 47 years of correct mathematics, Soren said, and I find that I do not know what to do with it. I looked at it. You could have gone back to Vrethkai space, I said. Retired veterans your government provides. I know what they provide, Soren said. I did not come here to be provided for. Then what did you come here for? Another pulse of the markings. You said something to me yesterday, Soren said. 2 words, entirely without strategic relevance. No rank behind them, no authority. You are, by every cooperative metric, a negligible entity in any conversation involving Vrethkai military history. Yeah, I said, that's a fair assessment. And yet, Soren said, I have spent approximately 19 hours thinking about those 2 words. She survived. Yes. I waited. There is no equivalent concept in Vrethkai military culture, Soren said. For what you did. Vrethkai we do not stand in the middle of a concourse and state the obvious. We do not name the thing that is present and visible and requires no naming, because the act of naming it implies that the naming itself has value, that the act of witnessing something out loud changes the nature of the thing witnessed. Doesn't it? I said. Soren looked at me for a long time. I am 47 years old in service years, it said. This does not translate directly to human aging, but I am what your species would call very old. I have been through more than your species has had time to accumulate. And a 26-year-old human with a decorative paper object has said something to me that I have spent 19 hours unable to put down. The sign was laminated, I said, for durability. Something moved in Soren's secondary optics. It was, I thought, the closest I had ever seen a Vrethkai come to being amused. I want to understand humans, Soren said. Not academically. I have read the academic literature. I want to understand how a species that has been part of the cooperative for 41 years out of 11,000 can walk into a room full of beings who find it irrelevant and say a true thing with that much. It stopped. With that much what? I said. Conviction, it said. Without justification for the conviction, without rank or authority or tactical precedent, just conviction, as though the truth of a thing is sufficient reason to state it. I thought about this. For us it is, I said. Usually, we're not always right about which things are true, but when we believe something is true, we tend to think that's reason enough to say it. This causes many diplomatic problems, Soren said. Constantly, I said. It also occasionally changes things. Soren was quiet. I would like to observe, it said finally, how your division functions, how humans navigate large institutional systems built by other species, how you persist in spaces that were not designed for you. You can just say watch us bumble around, I said. I did not say that. You kind of said that. The secondary optics moved again. I said persist, Soren said. These are not the same thing. I went back to Alina. She was still on the observation deck. She'd gotten a second coffee from somewhere, which I noted and filed under we are going to talk about that. And when I told her about the conversation, she was quiet for a long time. He wants to understand us, she said. More specifically, he wants to understand how we function. In systems that weren't built for us. He wants to understand why it works, she said. When it works, the thing you did. I just said the obvious thing. Rafe, she looked at me. I need you to understand something. I have been in the cooperative fleet for 4 years. I have worked alongside Vrethkai soldiers for 2 of those years. I have never not once seen a Vrethkai veteran of Sorn's classification request anything from a human. Request, not demand. Ask, not require. She held her coffee. They don't do that. It's not how they're built. They have a concept, Vrethkai. It translates approximately as the appropriate order of things. And in the appropriate order of things, Vrethkai of Sorn's rank do not go to humans with open hands. He came to the concourse, I said. He went back. He went back, she agreed. Because of 2 words. Because you made him feel something he didn't have a category for, she said. And rather than dismiss it, he followed it. She looked out at the docking assembly, where the Vrethkai freighter had completed berthing and was now being attended by a swarm of maintenance drones. That is not a small thing, Rafe. I know, I said. Don't downplay it. I'm not. You're doing the humble thing. I'm doing the accurate thing. I said 2 words and it landed because he was already standing in a place where it could land. The weight was already there. I just named it, she said, out loud. Yeah. She looked at her coffee. She survived, she said softly. I didn't say anything. Priya didn't, she said. 29 others didn't, but I did, and I've been so busy counting the ones who didn't, she stopped. We were quiet. The station rotated slowly, the way it always did, and the stars moved across the viewport in their steady drift. Hey, I said. Yeah. You survived. She looked at me. That's worth saying, I said, out loud. I think it's worth saying out loud. She made the sound again, the half laugh, half something else, and her eyes went bright, and she looked back at the viewport, and I watched her count something I couldn't see, and then let it go. Sorn began his placement the following morning. What happened in those first days, the things I watched happen, the things Alina told me about from the medical review corridors, the things that accumulated between all of us in ways I didn't fully understand until much later. That's the part I don't have clean language for. The part that resists the kind of telling where everything happens in the right order for the right reasons. What I can tell you is that Sorn was, professionally, extraordinary. He brought 47 years of pattern recognition to a division that processed thousands of transit entries daily, and within the first week, he'd identified 3 systemic inefficiencies that had been invisible to everyone else simply because they'd been there so long they'd become load-bearing. He noted them, politely, in a memo that was precisely formatted and devastatingly accurate. Vetholen read it. She looked at me. You did this, she said. I introduced a decorated veteran to the concept of administrative work. He fixed 3 systems that have been broken for 7 years in 4 days. He's a quick study. She looked at the memo again. There is a note here, she said, at the end. It says, I include these observations as a gesture of investment in the functioning of this division. I intend to continue participating. I have found it to be of value. She put the memo down. He's not here because he was asked, she said. He's here because he wants to be. Yeah, I said. A Vrethkai combat commander, at retirement, choosing to invest himself in a human administrative division on a transfer station. She made the small Sci-fi sound that indicated she was updating her model of reality. Because of 2 words. Because of Alina, I said. Because of Priya Samanthan and 29 others. Because of 47 years of correct mathematics and all the weight that comes with it. I paused. The 2 words just opened a door. Vetholen was quiet. Your species, she said finally, is deeply impractical. Yes, I said. And yet, I agreed. On the 8th day, Alina came to find me at my terminal. She'd finished her medical review. She was cleared conditionally, with follow-up requirements and a strongly worded recommendation for supported transition period. That in human terms meant please don't isolate yourself and please let people in. She sat in the chair beside my desk. "I've been thinking," she said. "Yeah. About staying." I turned from my terminal. "Helix Station," she said. "They have a position. Veteran liaison support, helping military personnel with transition processing, documentation, accessing cooperative support services. They've been trying to fill it for 8 months. I looked at her. "You want to stay?" I said. "I want," she paused. "I don't know how to go back to Earth. I don't know what I'd do there. I know how to be here. I know how to be useful here." And she stopped again. "And," I said. She looked at her hands. "Soren asked if I'd meet with him again," she said. "Officially, he wants to talk about the Palavar engagement, on record, for the Cooperative Historical Review Board." I was very still. "He wants to give testimony," she said, "about the decision, about the math, about what was lost." She looked up. "He says someone should name it out loud, officially. He says he learned that from a human." I didn't say anything for a moment. The terminal pinged. Something about a Dravathi delegation finally actually arriving. I ignored it. "He learned it from you," Alina said. "And you learned it from just being you. From being the kind of person who shows up with a laminated sign." "Alina, I'm serious." "I know. You changed something," she said. "You changed something in a 47-year-old Vrethkai veteran who didn't have, you gave him a category he didn't have. And he's using it. He's going to go on record and name 31 people that the math said were acceptable losses. He's going to say their names." The terminal pinged again. I ignored it again. "Say yes," I said, "to the position, stay." She looked at me. "I already said yes," she said, "this morning." I exhaled. "Good," I said. "I just needed you to know why," she said. "I needed you to know it wasn't just, I needed you to know that it matters, that what you did matters. Not just to me." "Priya Samanthan," I said. "Yeah." "What was the card game?" Alina blinked. "The one she was teaching you," I said. "The morning of the engagement, what was it called?" Alina was quiet for a long moment. And then, slowly, she said the name, a word from Kochi, a traditional game, specific and particular and entirely its own thing, and I wrote it down. I wrote it in my files. Because someone should know. Because someone should name it. Out loud. He cried. Not the way humans cry. The Vrethkai equivalent is a physiological response that happens in the secondary respiratory system. A deep rhythmic contraction that produces a low subsonic vibration, almost below the threshold of hearing but not quite. You feel it in your sternum before you hear it. It sounds, if you are standing close enough, like the station's structural supports in a pressure differential, like the building itself is adjusting to something it wasn't built to hold. I was standing close enough. So was Alina. So were 12 other beings in the Cooperative Historical Review Chamber, Level 4, Conference Suite 7, a room designed for official testimony and staffed that day by a Sathi senior archivist, 2 cooperative fleet representatives, 1 Grethani legal observer, a translation support team of 3, and 8 witnesses who had been, in various capacities, involved in or adjacent to the Palavar engagement 3 years prior. None of them had heard that sound before. I watched all 12 of them go very still. The testimony had been Soren's idea. He had initiated it. He had filed the request through the correct channels, with Vetholin's office providing administrative support and the Vrethkai Cultural Attaché's office providing 7 days of strenuous objections that were ultimately, after a review board consultation I was not present for, set aside. The objections, as I understood them, were procedural. A retired Vrethkai commander voluntarily submitting himself to historical review of a tactical decision that had already been evaluated and cleared was unusual. The cooperative's military review process was thorough. Decisions like the one Sorn had made at Palavar were not unusual. The math had been correct. The record showed it. The argument Sorn made, through channels I didn't fully have access to, was simple. The record showed the math. The record did not show the 31. He wanted to show the 31. I want to be careful about how I tell this part. Not because I'm afraid of it, but because there's a way to tell a story like this that turns it into something clean, something that resolves into a lesson with edges, and that would be wrong. It would be the kind of wrong that betrays the thing it's trying to honor. The testimony took 4 hours. Sorn spoke for most of it. His voice was what it always was, tectonic, certain, the kind of voice that had spent 47 years being the last word in a room, but there was something different in it that day. Not softer exactly, more committed. More willing to go to the parts of the story that had no tactical dimension. He described the morning of the Palavar engagement, the formation, the decision threshold, the calculus clear and quick and correct. He described the moment the unbroken Meridian's distress signal registered on his command display, the timestamp, the coordinates, the fleet identifier. He described the 4 seconds he spent running the calculation. Then he said, "I want to name them." The Sathe archivist looked up. "It is not standard procedure," it said, "for testimony of this." "I know," Sorn said. "I am requesting that it be included regardless." A pause. "Granted," the archivist said. Sorn reached into his regulation carry, the first personal object I had seen him produce, and placed on the table a piece of paper. Not a data chip, not a display surface, paper. Recycled smart paper, the standard issue kind. Something had been written on it in cooperative standard, by hand, in a script that was slightly unsteady, not from age, I thought, but from the effort of writing in a system that was not designed for Vrethkai hands. 31 names. He had written them himself. He read them out loud. All 31. And this is where I have to be careful, because I could tell you what that was like. The chamber, the silence, the way the 12 beings in that room sat differently while Sorn's voice moved through 31 names, the way the Grethani legal observer stopped taking notes and just sat. The way Alina, 3 seats to my left, held herself very still with her hands flat on her thighs. I could tell you that the sound Sorn made at the end, when he put the paper down, the subsonic contraction, the vibration in the sternum, I could tell you that none of us moved for a very long time after. But I think the most honest thing I can say is just, he named them. All 31. And the room held it. After the hearing formally concluded, people moved. The machinery of official process reasserted itself. Archivists collected recordings. The Grethani observer submitted their documentation. Translation teams packaged the session files. Sorn sat at the table for a while. I sat nearby, not across from him, beside. The distinction felt important. After a while he said, she was teaching her a card game. I looked at him. Sergeant Vale told me, he said, the morning of the engagement, Petty Officer Samanthan was teaching a card game. Yeah, I said, traditional game from Kochi. I did not know that, Sorn said. In 3 years and 7 months of carrying the 31, I did not know any of those things. I knew fleet identifiers and coordinates. I knew the count. Yeah. Knowing their names is different, he said. From knowing the count. Yes, I said, it is. Sorn was quiet for a moment. In Vrethkai culture, he said, we have a word, Gethvarolen. It has many translations. The closest is something like the weight that makes you real. The burden that proves you are not abstract. It is not a negative concept. It is the concept of being accountable to the specific. not the general. The 31, I said. The 31, he said, as people, not as a number. We have a concept, I said. More of a practice, really. We tell stories. We say names. We write things down. We take notes about card games and favorite colors and bad puns someone made in a break room. I paused. We do it because we believe the specific is where the real thing lives. The general is just framing. Framing, Sorn said. Context, background, you need it, but it's not the thing. The thing, Sorn said slowly, is Priya Samanthan and the card game, and the unfinished second round. Yeah, I said, the thing is always the specific. Elena found us 20 minutes later. She'd been talking to the Sci-fi archivist. Apparently, there was a provision in the cooperative historical framework for expanding the record to include personal testimony from survivors of an engagement, and the archivist had wanted to explain the procedure in case Elena chose to use it. She sat down across from us. She looked at Sorn. You wrote the names, she said. Yes. By hand. The process of writing in your physical tradition seemed, Sorn paused. More honest than a data entry, more committed. Elena looked at the paper, which was still on the table. Can I see, she said. Sorn pushed it toward her. She picked it up, read through it. Her eyes moved from name to name, and I watched her face, the controlled devastation thing, yes, but also something else. Something that was recognition and grief, and underneath both of those, something quiet. Something that looked, and I might have been wrong about this, it was possible I was projecting, it looked like relief. The relief of a person who has been carrying something alone for a long time, and has just found that someone else is also carrying it. She put the paper down. Priya's name, she said. You spelled it correctly. I requested guidance, Sorn said. I did not want to get it wrong. Elena made a sound. Short, caught. The kind of sound that happens when emotion takes the throat by surprise. You asked someone how to spell her name, Elena said. Yes. So you could write it correctly. Yes. Elena looked at the paper. Thank you, she said, for all of them. Sorn inclined his head. And then Elena did something I had not seen her do in 4 years. She put her hand on the table. Palm up, open, the human gesture of here, take this if you need it, I'm offering. Vrethkai, don't touch. This is not a mystery or a cultural quirk. It is a deep structural aspect of Vrethkai social architecture. Touch between non-bonded individuals is, in their framework, an act of enormous intimacy or enormous aggression, and the line between those two is contextual and nuanced, and not always clear to outsiders. Elena knew this. She did it anyway. She put her hand on the table, palm up, and she said nothing, and she waited. Sorn looked at her hand. For a long moment. And then, with the careful deliberateness of a being navigating a thing it had never done before, it placed one of its 4-leg digits, the secondary, thinner one, not the primary structural claw but the one that ended in a precision appendage, in the center of her palm. Contact. 3 seconds. No one breathed. Sorn withdrew. Elena closed her hand briefly, and then opened it again. Neither of them said anything. There was nothing to say. What I'm going to tell you now is the part I've tried to write many times. I've tried to make it dramatic. I've tried to make it clean. I've tried to give it the shape of a lesson, the architecture of a revelation. It keeps refusing. Because what happened over the following weeks and months on Helix Station was not a single event. It was a slow accumulation, the kind of thing that you don't notice is happening until you're already inside it, and you look around and realize the landscape has changed. Sorn stayed. Not temporarily. Long-term residency, as the transit manifest had noted, and as the days accumulated it became clear that this was not a placeholder designation, but a fact about his life now. He worked in the human division. He was professionally excellent. The efficiency improvements he'd suggested in that first memo were implemented and functioned as documented, and he had an instinct for systemic problems that Vetholin described, in one of her most expressive moments, as alarming. But that wasn't the thing. The thing was smaller than that. The thing was that Sorn started slowly, unevenly, with the careful deliberateness of a being trying to learn a new language without a grammar guide, learning how to be with people. Not strategically, not professionally. Just with them. He learned Elena's coffee order. Not because he could consume coffee, but because he noticed she came to the shift rotation earlier on the days she had her particular kind, and he started making sure it was available, through logistical channels I didn't fully track on those days. She noticed after the third time. She didn't say anything about it directly. She just started coming to find him in the morning before the shift, and they would sit in the common area, he with his environmental regulation tablet, she with her coffee, and they wouldn't always talk. Sometimes they just sat. I would walk in sometimes and find them there, the enormous tarnished silver Vrethkai and the tired dark-eyed human, in their respective silences, and there was something about it I couldn't quite name. The Drevathi traders, who came through the station regularly, and had by now given up on pretending they weren't extremely interested in the ongoing Sorn situation, made a harmonic I'd never heard before when they first saw this. I asked a translation resource about it later. The rendering was, two heavy things finding equilibrium. The thing with humans and Vrethkai officially was that they didn't mix. Not hostilely, not with contempt. The Vrethkai had their opinions about humanity's brevity as a cooperative member, as did most long-established species, but it was the opinion of the mildly bemused rather than the actively disdainful. We were new. We were loud. We kept saying the quiet parts out loud and then being surprised by the consequences. We were not, in the official accounting, particularly relevant to species of Vrethkai standing and history. What started happening on Helix Station in those months was that this accounting began to quietly, persistently revise itself. It started with Sorn, the simple fact of his presence in the human division, which attracted attention from other Vrethkai transiting through the station. Not many at first, but they looked. They registered that this was happening. They logged it in whatever way Vrethkai log things, which I suspect is more like adjusting a deep structural assumption than making a note. It continued with the memo that Sorn submitted to the Cooperative Historical Review Board following his testimony, a supplementary document, 12 pages, titled in cooperative standard as something that translated approximately to the case for specificity in conflict record-keeping, a proposal. The argument was, at its core, that the cooperative's historical documentation system was structurally designed to record the general and suppress the specific. Numbers, coordinates, tactical outcomes, and that this design choice made 11,000 years ago for reasons of archival efficiency had a consequence. The individual was lost in the aggregate, and the aggregate over time lost weight. It was, the board noted in their response, an unusually humanistic argument for a Vrethkai source. Sorn's response to this observation was brief. He had, he said, been studying the species. The proposal was referred to committee. The committee took 7 months. The proposal passed. Elena came to find me the night the proposal passed. It was late station night by the artificial cycle, which meant the concourse was quieter and the light had shifted to the amber glow that most species found easier to rest under. She knocked on my quarters door, and when I opened it she had her coffee, the real kind always. She'd never gone back to the approximate, and she said, "It passed." I stood back and let her in. We sat at the small table by the viewport. The star field tonight was the dense cluster again, the one that looked like spilled light. 31 names, she said, in the official record, not as a footnote, as a component of the primary documentation. Priya Samanthan, I said. Priya Samanthan, Elena said, in the official cooperative historical record, forever. I thought about that. About what forever means when you are a species that has been in the cooperative for 41 of its 11,000 years. About the particular kind of permanence that comes from being written into a record that will outlast the planet you came from. About a 24-year-old woman from Kochi who was winning a card game on the morning she died, and whose name was now, permanently, officially, bureaucratically, part of the story. That happened, I said, because Soren came back to the concourse. That happened, Elena said, because you stepped in. That happened, I said, because he was already standing in a place where something could land. We were quiet. Both things are true, she said. Yeah, I said. She looked out the viewport. I talked to him today, she said. About the proposal. He was doing the thing, the Vrethkai thing, where they get very still and very certain and you can't tell from the outside what's happening inside. What did he say? He said, she paused. He said that in Vrethkai culture when something is named publicly, it becomes part of the Geth Varolan, the weight that makes you real. He said the 31 had weight before, he'd been carrying it for 3 years, but private weight is carried alone. And now it's in the record, she said. Now everyone who accesses that record carries it with them, even briefly, even without knowing it. She looked at her coffee. He said that's what humans do. He said we take weight and we distribute it. We make everyone hold a little piece so no one person breaks. I was quiet. He said he's never seen another species do it the way we do, she said. Systematically, culturally, like it's a belief system. Is it? I said. I think so, she said. I think that's what storytelling is, what memorial services are, what names on walls are, what signs at arrival gates are. She looked at me. Taking something that happened and making it something everyone carries just a little bit. Outside, the spilled light cluster turned slowly in the station's rotation. Rafe, she said. Yeah. She survived those 2 words. She looked at me. You didn't just say them to Soren, you said them to me. I know, I said. I needed to hear them. I know that too. She looked at her coffee. I've been working with the new veteran liaison program, she said. There are a lot of them coming through. Earthborn mostly, but some Grethani, 2 Sathai who were in frontier service. People who have the math and don't know what to do with it. Yeah. And I've been saying it to them when I can tell they need it. She paused. Not just the words, the concept. That surviving matters. That being here on the other side of the math is worth acknowledging. I looked at her. It's working, she said softly. Not always, not on everyone, but sometimes. Yeah, I said, I know. She looked at me. You knew, she said. I had a theory, I said. A theory. That the thing that matters isn't the strategy, I said. It's not the rank or the authority or the tactical precedent. It's someone standing next to someone else and saying the true thing. The obvious, simple, true thing that doesn't have any justification other than it's true. I paused. And that it lands differently when someone with no reason to say it says it anyway. Elena was quiet for a long moment. You have no idea, she said finally, how much you look like someone who has no idea what they're doing. I genuinely usually don't. And yet, I said. She smiled. Not the complex smile, not the controlled devastation thing or the half laugh. Just a smile, the simple, direct kind that means I see you and I'm glad you exist. I had been waiting to see that smile for 4 years. The last thing I want to tell you about happened on a Wednesday station time, which doesn't mean much in deep space, but we kept Earth's calendar out of stubbornness and habit, and the very human conviction that our counting system for days deserved to apply everywhere. It was 6 months after Alina arrived, 8 months since Soren had submitted the proposal, 2 months since it had passed. I was at my terminal doing the thing I did every morning, the transit manifest, the arrivals, the ongoing diplomatic saga of the Dravathi delegation, which at this point had become something of a station landmark, when Soren appeared at my desk. He did this sometimes. He would simply appear, with the quiet certainty of a geological formation that had decided to visit your desk. I had learned to take it in stride. "There is a situation," he said. I looked up. "Gate 12, he said. "Arrived on the overnight freight transfer, a soldier." "Ours," I said, meaning human. "Yes," Soren said. "Earthborn, 22 years old. She has been listed as AWOL for 11 months. She is not in good condition." I was already pushing back from my desk. "She is also," Soren said, "not complying with station security processing. She has not been violent. She is simply not responding. Security has her in the holding corridor, but they do not know what to do with her." I thought about this. "They called you," I said. "They called Sergeant Vale," Soren said. "She asked me to come get you." The soldier's name was Kira Oduya. She was sitting on the floor of the holding corridor with her back against the wall and her knees pulled up and her arms wrapped around them. She was wearing a mix of regulation gear and civilian clothing, the patchwork of someone who has been making do for a long time. Her hair had grown out past regulation length. There were 12 different stamps on her transit pass from 6 different systems. She had, the security report indicated, been traveling for 11 months on a series of freight passes and civilian transit vouchers, moving steadily toward cooperative core space from the outer frontier zones where Earth's fleet had been operating. She had not told anyone where she was going. She had not asked anyone for anything. She had just moved, steadily inward, like something navigating by instinct toward something she couldn't have named. Alina was crouched in front of her, talking in a low voice. I stopped in the corridor. Soren stopped beside me. Kira Oduya looked up, past Alina, and saw me, a man with no rank and no tactical relevance, holding a transit manifest instead of a laminated sign because I hadn't had time to laminate anything. And then she looked at Soren. A 22-year-old human soldier, on the floor of a holding corridor, looked up at a 47-year service Vrethkai veteran. Something moved across her face. Not fear, not deference, something more complicated than either of those. Recognition, maybe. The recognition of someone who has been carrying something alone for a very long time and has just walked, without meaning to, into a room with other people who are also carrying it. Soren moved. He didn't crouch. A Vrethkai commander does not crouch, physiologically or culturally, but he lowered himself to the floor, sat, arranged his secondary plates in the configuration I had learned over 8 months to associate with "I am not going anywhere. I am here." He looked at Kira Oduya. She looked back at him. 22 years old, he said. His voice at low register was still the tectonic thing, but quiet, careful. First posting, I would estimate, outer frontier. She said nothing. "You are here," he said. "After 11 months of traveling, you are here." She looked at him. Her jaw worked, the muscles in her throat moved. "I didn't know where else to go," she said. Her voice was raw, scraped down. The voice of someone who hadn't said very many words in a very long time. "You are here," Soren said again. "That is sufficient." She looked at him. And then she looked at Alina. And Alina said, because she had learned it, because someone had said it to her, because the specific is where the real thing lives, because weight distributed is weight survivable. She said, "You're ours." 2 words. Different words than mine, but the same shape. The same conviction without authority. The same true thing said out loud for no reason other than that it was true. You're ours. You have made it here. You are standing on the other side of the math. You belong to us now, not owned, not claimed, but held. Part of the count. Part of the weight we carry collectively so none of us break alone. Kira Oduya put her face in her hands. She didn't cry exactly. Or she did, but not the way you cry in private. She cried the way a person cries when they have been trying very hard not to, for a very long time, and their body has simply run out of the energy required to continue trying. Elena sat down on the floor next to her. I sat down on the other side. Soren remained where he was, settled and certain, the geological formation that had decided to stay. The holding corridor was not a beautiful space. It was fluorescent lit and regulation beige, and it smelled like the rest of the station, the circuit board and the chemistry lab. There was nothing poetic about it. We sat there anyway. I don't have a clean ending for this story. I've tried to write one, and it keeps coming out wrong, too resolved, too lesson-shaped, the kind of ending that ties a bow around something that is still, honestly, in progress. Kira Oduya stayed. She applied for veteran transition support through Elena's liaison program. She is, as of the last thing I'm authorized to report, doing the difficult, non-linear, frequently frustrating work of figuring out who she is when she is not in the middle of something catastrophic. Soren continues his placement. He submitted a second proposal to the Historical Review Board 6 months after the first one passed, a proposal to establish a standardized process for personal testimony inclusion in military documentation across all cooperative member species. It is currently in committee. He expects it to take at least a year. He is patient about this. He has learned patience about things that are worth waiting for. Elena runs the Veteran Liaison Program now. It has 14 staff. It processes more than 200 cases per month. On her desk she keeps 3 things: a coffee mug from Kochi that someone sent her without explanation, a framed printout of the transit manifest showing her arrival date, and a piece of paper in her own handwriting with 31 names, and under them a card game's name. I still do the morning manifest. I still show up with things that are slightly more laminated than strictly necessary. I still say the obvious true thing in rooms where nobody has thought it worth saying, and I am still, regularly, the smallest entity present when I do, and it still lands sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't, and I have learned to be okay with the uncertainty of not always knowing which. What I have not learned to be okay with, what I don't want to be okay with, what I hope I never become efficient enough to dismiss, is the weight of the specific. The 31 names, the card game, the color blue. The way a 47-year veteran of correct mathematics came back to a concourse to find a 26-year-old human with a laminated sign, because something true had been said in his direction, and he had nowhere else to put it. The way that, when you say you're ours to someone sitting on the floor of a holding corridor, what you are really doing is taking a piece of their weight and putting it in your hands and saying, I've got this part. I'll carry this part. You don't have to carry all of it. The way that is not a strategy. The way that is not a tactic. The way that has no military precedent and no diplomatic framework and no entry in any cooperative database until Soren wrote one. The way that is, as best I can describe it, just human, impractical, and yet, outside the viewport, the stars keep their old patience. They were there before the cooperative, before the Vrethkai, before the first species looked up from whatever world they came from and decided the dark above them meant something worth reaching toward. They'll be there long after all of us have named everything we can name. But right now we are here. And that is worth saying. Out loud.